Now, when Danny Boyle walks into a studio, things happen. Like, for example, the time, Danny, you came in on a sort of a previous incarnation of this show. Seb Coe was sitting at the same table. And during the travel news, you and him seemed to be getting very on and talking about something, which then turned out to be a booking of some sort.
No, it was true. I'd never met him, and I met him on your show, or in the gaps between your show, or whatever those those moments are when we're off air. So yeah, that was a turning point for me. Yeah.
So just to be clear, we were responsible for getting you that gig. I think that's what he was saying.
You could polish it into that way, kind of shape.
Exactly.
Yes.
Thank you for saying that out loud, Danny. Thank you.
And when we think back to that opening ceremony, it seems like a very, very long time ago. If you were, I found myself thinking a lot about it this week, just as I was thinking, having seen Trainspotting and thinking about you coming back on the show. If it was this year, if you were making that opening ceremony for this year, would it be different? Would you, because the world seems to have changed quite a lot, but would you change anything?
Yeah, you'd certainly make it, because one of the things we did was to try and make it as organic as possible. We sat for 6 months and just talked about how we wanted to reflect the country, really, the best things about us. So inevitably it will have changed a bit. I don't think its fundamental nature would have changed, no, because I think that I think we have a very distorted impression of what's going on now, and our fundamental values are being challenged, but they remain fragile but intact, really. So I wouldn't imagine it would be radically different. No.
When you say we have a distorted view of what's going on, you mean that we feel more pessimistic than we should do, or?
Yeah, I worry. I have a grave worry that the media, and I'm not kind of like, I am part of the media. Is that the media's the stories are so vibrant around bad stuff at the moment that, or what I perceive as being bad stuff, that's taking everyone's attention, and it's exciting and dangerous, and we're all going there in a way that's kind of making us feel like, whoa. And the media always do that, and ordinary people who are complaining, apparently are the role of the people who are getting left behind a bit at the moment, are always outside our capability of fully appreciating, really. So I don't despair as much at the moment as I know other people do. I think some of it is to do with just the way the media inevitably feed on what's most different. And at the moment, that's what's most different, really.
And while we're on the subject, just broadly of politics, but moving it onto your film, was there a point in the conversation about when you're looking at the screenplay for T2 Trainspotting? I must ask you about the title in a second, which everyone has done, where you thought of reflecting the fact that there'd been an independence referendum and the fact that there might be another one? Was there any, because there were some kind of references to the English in the first one, was there ever a point where there was, things have changed in Scotland as well, part of the conversation?
No, not really, because we kind of, it was obviously ongoing, and it's very difficult to predict, and we didn't really want to get into it. Weirdly, we were shooting in June last year when the Brexit vote happened, and as you'll know, we had an ingredient in our plot. And then there isn't much of a plot, because there isn't in these kind of films, but what there is concerns the European Union funds, which somehow the guys managed to access to help build this sex sauna. So that would just be grist to the mill for some newspapers about the European Union, but actually that wasn't the intention. No, it was more, I think we felt, so we shot the scene outside with 3 flags flying in the distance: the European Union flag, the Saltire, the Scottish flag, and the Union Jack. So we covered all our bases, really.
Yeah, because you predicting politics, I was just thinking of Millions. Yes. There you go, where Britain has voted and has gratefully received the euro. Thanks very much.
Absolutely terrible predictions. And like Elliot, who wrote in, will turn out to be the Prime Minister of this country in 25 years' time.
Exactly, and he will remember.
And he will remember.
Was there always going to be Trainspotting 2? Well, in your heart?
As you'll know, that normally a sequel you do quite quickly. If you've had a hit, there's always there's a kind of pressure to do another one quite quickly, a commercial pressure. I don't remember that at the time, and I think none of us would have entertained it anyway. We didn't really want to do anything like that. But then Irving published this book, Porno, after about 7 years, I think. It was
2002, isn't it?
It was sort of a 10 years later catch-up, and we obviously considered it then. And John Hodge, who wrote the original screenplay for the first film and for the new one, did a very decent job adapting it, and very professional. And we all looked at it and we just thought it's not good enough, including John. And I realise now why, because when we went back for the last time 2 years ago to see if we could produce something for the 20th anniversary, he went away and he wrote something much more personal and quite painful in certain respects about himself and it's about us as well, really, about the aging process and you taking stock, really. So that was, and when he sent it to me, I just sent it straight to the actors because I knew they'd do it because it was valuable and personal. It had something to say. It wasn't just there because it was a rehash or a pastiche or a replica. It was something that had its own integrity, though it does speak to the other film. They do talk to each other in a way, yeah, but not as a traditional sequel might do.
Shall we play, because we have a clip from T2 Trainspotting, trippingly, which I keep wanting to say. So this is Spud and Renton out in the wilds discussing a potential future.
I can't feel again, Mark. I need to detox the system.
Oh, Spud, detox the system. What does that even mean? It doesn't mean anything. It's not getting it out of your body that's the problem. It's getting it out of your mind. You are an addict.
I think I haven't heard that 100,000 times, Mark. You got 12 more steps for me, comedy.
So, be addicted. Be addicted to something else.
Like you're running until I feel sick?
Yes. Or something else. You've got to channel it. You've got to control it. People try all sorts. Some people do boxing.
Boxing?
Well, it's just an example. I don't mean you should...
So what did you channel into?
Getting away.
That's a clip from T2 Trainspotting. When I saw the film, I think it was the first screening here, and I saw it in the IMAX in Leicester Square. Yeah, exactly. Which is, it's not. I have to say, it's actually not the ideal screen because it's kind of slightly the wrong shape. Anyway, I had done an onstage thing with Ewan Bremner a couple of weeks beforehand, and he'd said this thing. I said, "How is it?" He said, "It's really, really good, but obviously there was a lot of anxiety about it being as good as I think it is." And then you stood up and you did this introduction, which I'm slightly going to paraphrase because your language wasn't entirely repeatable, but you said that the phrase that you kept hearing on set was, "It had better not be rubbish." Okay?
Yes.
And then I sat, I think, 2 seats down from Andrew McDonald, who basically said,
you just want to
Andrew
explain who he
is the producer of Trainspotting and, of course, of T2 Trainspotting. And I watched, and then the film happened. And I cannot begin to tell you the sense of relief at the moment that I thought, okay, this isn't that. And I think it then went on to be much more than just not that. But that anxiety, which was there right until the film... I mean, I was genuinely terrified of you letting us all down.
I know. I think regular. Not that you're not a regular person, Mark, but I think regular people were as well. Ordinary people have that because we had this screening in Crawley. We did this test screening in Crawley because they look for somewhere ordinary. So, dear
sorry, Crawley.
Sony obviously think Crawley's ordinary. I think it looks spectacular to me. But anyway, and so we did the thing, and they came out afterwards, and we were hanging around because you hang around for focus groups and stuff like that, and people pushed through the security guards and said, "Thank goodness it's okay." And then they left. They didn't want a selfie or anything like that. They just wanted "It's all right, good, we're off."
It's because it meant so. It was a cultural moment when it came out, and presumably you must have thought, well, we want it not to be rubbish. But did you kind of think, I wonder if we can be a cultural moment again, or were you not aiming it that high?
Yeah, you can't, because you kind of also you weren't aiming that in that direction the first time anyway.
The first one was almost a guerrilla production, wasn't it? It was very,
And if those things happen to you, you're lucky and you should be grateful for it. You certainly shouldn't think that you can repeat it or not. But you knew it would have a baggage that could work against it, in a disappointment sense, or it could work for it. And you hope it works for it because I think it's a catch up for everybody, really. You get a chance. Oh, well, listen, you guys remember The Likely Lads, and I remember as a kid seeing it and then seeing the remake, the TV, the catch up, whatever happened to The Likely Lads. And I remember being just astonished that these guys who I had an image of, I was catching up with them, and they changed. They weren't. They were the same, but they changed. And it was very powerful to me, that. And obviously we were trying to harness that kind of attempt to see as it happens with these guys, masculinity over time, really, because that's basically what the film is. It's a look at their boys in the other movie, and now they're men, and not in a particularly admirable way in certain ways. They're funny still, and there's a lot of bravado in it, or a desperate bravado to try and relive the past or take vengeance on the past. But it's really a kind of look at masculinity over time.
Did they need directing? The main four guys?
No.
You basically just asked Danny Boyle whether he actually had anything to do with it.
Well, I am, really.
No, it's absolutely. Listen, they two of them have made feature films themselves. Bobby and Ewan have both recently finished their own feature films. The four of them have told way more stories than I've told in 20 years. You know, actors will do 3-4 films a year or a long-running TV series or whatever. So they're very skilled storytellers. And when we got back together, the first scene that we shot was an incredible scene under a pub. There's a cellar where Begbie turns up and introduces himself.
Careful about plot spoilers, but
back to Sick Boy, back to Simon after 20 years. It's the first time they've met for 20 years. That was the first thing we shot, and we started, and it's that scene where they do the kind of guerrilla stuff, and I was like, oh my God, I'm gonna have to raise my game here, because they were so up for it. You could feel it, because I'd never known it before. They had that confidence that having played it before, it was theirs. Nobody else was going to. It was no question of recasting. So they'd done it before. It worked, and they matrixed in their own 20 years of experience into it, and they were ready. And you just had to let them off the leash, really. So no, I didn't do very much, Simon.
So if you compare your directing for this movie with the first movie, presumably there you were creating and crafting and doing a traditional director's job, whereas it sounds as though this one you'd done your work before then.
Well, yeah, you kind of like you like to think you contribute something, obviously, but in terms of the performances, yes. No, seriously, a big part of directing, a large part of directing is, especially if you're really interested in performances that are more than just a kind of very natural observed realism. And these are much bigger performances than that. But a big part of directing is helping actors have the confidence to cross a chasm of confidence that they might feel about, can I do this? Am I going to look a fool if I push it this far? Everybody says do nothing. You know, it's always safest on film to do very little and let the camera do the work. Whereas I'm always encouraging them to really perform it. And that's taken away. You don't need to do that. That confidence was there. They had it, you know, so I could get on with other stuff like the soundtrack and all that kind of stuff, and the tea and coffee.
One of the things I really liked it, and as I said, it wasn't just the relief. But what was strange, I saw it with I was sitting next to Jack Howard, who's a lot younger than me. And
remind us who he is.
He's an internet presence and personality and blogger and vlog. Jack Howard. Anyway, I speak for the nation. And I speak for the youth. So he was laughing an awful lot because there's a lot of joke, and so was I, because I think there's a lot of humour in it, as there was in the first one. The thing that struck me about it, however, was how, and I mean this in a good way, how melancholic and how sad a lot of it felt. Not sad as in regret, but sad as in dealing with, because a lot of it is about memory. A lot of it actually is scenes in which you're shuffling like cards, the present and the past. It's almost like the past and future talking to each other. And I also loved the fact that the narrative moves round towards Spud finding his voice. Wow. And there's a couple of moments when I found myself almost in tears. Well, actually, not almost in tears about him finding his voice. Because,
yeah, it loops. I won't give it away, but the film loops as well. It sort of moves forward in time with some regrets, looking back, and some attempt to relive that past. That's the fun of it, the bravado of it. But there's also a loop where you loop back to the original novel and you find out something about the writing of the original novel, if you like, which sounds odd to talk about that in a film, but it was like the original film was an artifact almost that the characters knew about. It's almost like it's almost like you have to deal with it, really. And it does appear like there's an extraordinary scene where Spud comes out of a boxing gym. He's tried to take up boxing to distract him. Well, that scene you played is he recommends recommends boxing to him, maybe as a way of distracting him from addiction worries and the back and forth of that. And he comes out of this boxing gym. He's just been knocked out in the boxing gym and his head's spinning a bit. And he finds himself in the past, literally in the past, like that. And so you have to deal with that. But but it's the loop of time that's so extraordinary, which apparently, and I can't pretend to have read Proust. I've read about Proust. Apparently, that's the extraordinary thing that you learn through the remembrance of things past, the remembrance of time past, which is that this loop of time, which only really you become to recognise as you get older. It is one of the few salutary things about getting older. Is that you recognise. And it's often why you get grandparents and grandchildren with that extraordinary relationship, which those of us in the middle don't really understand. I've got quite how close they are. And that is also linked to this loop of time, apparently.
There's interestingly a scene in Jalebi with Dev Patel in Lion, in which Dev Patel eats a jalebi, and it's the taste of it, which is actually the Proustian moment that
The
suddenly
Madeleine
takes
moment,
exactly that takes him right back to his childhood. And there was the taste of that in T2 Trainspotting. The other thing, if you're talking about that looping thing, one of the things I really liked about it, Simon sort of rather dismissively said, okay, so you didn't do anything, the actors did all the stuff. As a director and as a visual stylist, you come in a tradition of British cinema, which goes from Powell and Pressburger through Ken Russell, through Nick Rogue, those kind of people. And I love the fact that you still make films that don't look like other people's mainstream British films. You still make films that look like you're in that other tradition of British cinema making.
Well, it's a great tradition. The other tradition that we're not talking about is a great tradition, obviously, but I do really treasure that other tradition as well, which is not based on necessarily based on a social realism, though there is a grittiness obviously within the Trainspotting world, which comes out of Irving's novels.
And just on the title, you couldn't have called it porno because that would have got the wrong ideas. And
well, also it isn't porno, is it?
No,
it's a news story based, drawing inspiration from those two novels.
T2 Trainspotting and not Trainspotting 2. I mean, was that a long conversation that you had, or
it was? So we were originally, we were determined, John Hodge, the screenwriter, and I, we were determined not to call it Trainspotting 2 because we wanted it to have its own voice, and it might not be a sequel. It might not feel like a sequel. Yeah. We wanted to make the film first, and everybody's trying to cram you into that package which will sell best, which is Trainspotting 2. And so we kind of insisted. At first, we were going to call it The Least Unfamiliar, which is a terrible title, but we hung on to that for a long time as a defiant, and eventually we were knocked off that stool. So then we said, right, what would the characters call it? Because that threw all the marketing people, and they said, what do they matter? They're fictional. No, we said, no, what would they call it? And if you ask them, they would call it T2, because although they loved James Cameron's film, they'd want to cheese him off as well at the same time, because that's the kind of people that they are.
Nicely done. And there's a tea shop called T2 just around the corner, and you can go there.
They sent me some tea actually, hoping to create a bond between us, I think.
The really rebellious thing, you should have called it Sunshine 2, just for your own pleasure. Now,
you've already heard how our listeners write, okay, and you've already heard how smart they are. We have got some extraordinary questions for you. I don't know if do you have to go at 3, by the way? Can you stay at 10 past?
Of course, yeah, no.
I don't want to put you out. Are you sure that's absolutely right?
Listen, you're always the last on the circuit of opening a film. It's always the same. And I'm yours, really.
Is that a good or a bad thing?
I can stay and have dinner if you want.
All right. So I think you'll like this. There's an email from a guy called Neil Williams. Mark and Simon wanted to send these fond memories on the day of the long-awaited sequel to Trainspotting. And when you have Danny at your side, I was fortunate enough to be one of the assistant editors on the original Trainspotting movie. During the shoot, it was my job to synchronise the picture and sound, which meant I had the rare privilege of effectively being the first person to see and hear all the footage shot for the film. As these remarkable images and sensational performances came together before my eyes, there was this overwhelming realisation that I was at the centre of something truly special. I remember Danny sending a music cassette. How dated
cassette. You should explain that to the nation,
Yes,
Simon.
It's a cassette with music on it. From the shoot in Glasgow to our cutting rooms in London, which outlined his ideas for source music to soundtrack the film. And on it were Bowie, Blondie, Bjork, Brian Eno, Iggy Pop. There was also a note suggesting that we try and find dance music similar to the theme produced by Left Field for Shallow Grave, on which I was a trainee, says Neil. Danny and I shared similar music tastes, and we both loved the likes of Left Field, Orbital and Andy Weatherall. I brought in a collection of CDs with track suggestions written on the cases in white Chinagraph pencil, which were used to mark the edits on the film. I had a then little-known follow-up single to the album, Dub Not Bass With My Headman by Underworld. Yeah,
Dub Not Bass With My Headman.
Yeah, I kind of said that, but with slightly less
faster.
Yeah. It's written as one word, isn't it? Yeah.
Which was an album I knew Danny liked, and I wrote on the CD, "Try Track 2." This was Born Slippy, a track which was often played at house parties I went to with my friends. There'd been no greater moment in my film career when Mashiro, the editor, told me that Danny had chosen this track to be included in the film and showed me the initial edit of the astonishing end sequence. Some weeks later, after Picture Lock, I got a call from Andrew MacDonald, the aforementioned, asking if I'd come out to the sound mix and could I bring the Born Slippy CD with me. I travelled out to the mix the same day and was asked if I could leave the CD there as the sound technicians could transfer it because they didn't have one. Andrew eventually returned the CD to me at the start of the next project, A Life Less Ordinary. So essentially, it's my CD that now bears the now faded Chinograph note that is actually on the soundtrack of the film.
Oh, there you go. I remember Neil. So we did go back to some of the sounds of the original film.
Yes, you do.
But fractured and changed.
But changed.
Yeah,
We
exactly.
thought we can't just replicate them. You have to kind of change them. And we got Prodigy did an amazing remix of Lost for Life, which allowed us to use it again. And Rick Smith from Underworld did this extraordinary rethinking of Born Slippy. And so you have a kind of emotional muscle, like a heart memory of it as you hear it. You know it's that track, but it's different. And it's
And you
like
hear like fragmented chords, don't you? And
Yes.
that's all it takes. You
Yeah.
talk about Proust again. It's like literally that one, whatever it is, a suspension or whatever.
weird, isn't it?
And speaking of brevity, and I won't give anything away, but the bit where Ewan goes back to his parents' house and puts on a record.
Yeah, it's very
Briefly.
funny. It's very good.
Yeah, it's good that, and also,
And everybody knows how quickly can you recognise something. He puts on a, takes it off again. Oh no!
no, I know that, but it's also your boyhood home, isn't it? My boyhood bedroom stayed the same for 30 odd years. I used to sleep in it as a 50-year-old man, and it was still exactly the same as when I'd left it when I was like 18.
Very quickly, just before the news, I heard a story that when Perfect Day ended up first, that your music editor, apparently put it on to that sequence, the overdose sequence, and a producer, maybe Andrew MacDonald, said, "It's brilliant. If you show it to Danny, I'll kill you because we can't afford it."
Yeah, we were very lucky. Apparently the person who made the difference, because we couldn't afford those great tracks, Lust for Life and Perfect Day, was David Bowie, who'd seen the original film we made, Shallow Grave, liked it, and said you should give these guys a break and let them use your music, to Lou Reed and Iggy Pop.
Did you have good fun choosing the sound? As Alex, age 13, has sent us in a question about, how long you sat around working out what tracks you were going to include and which you didn't.
Yeah, it's constant. Sometimes it's like during the shooting, and sometimes it's mostly during the editing, actually. But it's one of the joys of it, of course. Yeah.
Blondie was a surprise, I thought.
Blondie's a deliberate return, because Dreamin' wasn't used in the first film, and Dreamin's one of the great pop songs of all time, with one of the greatest bits of drumming of all time on it. And you see him in
all the
video.
time.
You see him on the drums in it like that, and that's just one of the great moments. Yeah.